Brother Jesse Midget will be speaking for us this morning, and his title is Water Equals Life and or Death. And in preparation for his remarks, he's asked that we read two readings from the first chapter of Genesis, Genesis 1 through 10, and verses 20 through 23. Genesis 1, beginning with verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the faces of the water. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And then Genesis 1, verses 20 through 23. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, the fowl that may fly above the earth, and in open firmament of heaven." And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth." And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So let us give our attention to Brother Jesse on water equals life and or death. Brother Jesse.
Thanks, Roger. I'm going to provide forced cooling for myself today. Hopefully it won't bleed into the microphone as noisy. This is a stroller fan, if you're not familiar with these. We'll see how long it stays there. All right. Well, first off, I wanted to thank everyone. I was supposed to speak earlier this year. Of course, my mom passed, and the other brothers pitched in and rearranged the schedule such that I was able to have more time to get used to that, and appreciate that is possible when needed. And also, Brother Randy is at Hampton Road speaking today, so I'll miss him, but he's doing that good work. And I don't know about, there we go. So the topic today is a deep subject, and we're going to skim the surface, and we're going to add a sprinkling of science to it as well. So with those terrible dad puns, we'll begin. So I don't know if you've ever heard of a bluff slide. These are really popular because it sounds very weird and professional. At NASA, you have a bluff slide, which is the bottom line up front, where I tell you what I'm going to tell you. And so we're going to look at water to show that God made the creation with exactly the things that were needed for the life as we know it, okay? Mortal life as we know it. And he made rules that govern the creation, chemical, physical, lawful, and he made it possible to operate for a time within those rules and laws. And for instance, you notice in that first chapter, it doesn't say God created water. It's just, it has to be there. It's just part of everything. It's part of the earth, and it has to be there. But later on, he made his son, who controlled and had control over these laws. And Jesus demonstrated that physically with his mastery over water. We're going to get into detail later. This is just the overview, right? And he also mastered sin and death. Remember last week, I said that he broke the sin and death barrier. He made it possible for humans to approach God and be forgiven and obtain immortality. Just like he made it possible to walk on water, turn water into wine, and do all of the calm storms and calm waves. So we can draw faith from the perfection of water that's around us and the whole setup that God has done. None of this is an accident. He didn't have to use water. He made water exactly the way it is. In fact, he made hydrogen and oxygen exactly the way they are, and he made the subatomic molecules exactly the way they are, and the forces between them. None of this is accidental. So, with that, let's get into it. So what is water? It's hydrogen, the most plentiful thing in the universe, which by itself isn't going to sustain life. Makes up 75% of everything. And 90% of its atoms, because they're very small, right? So you count the number of atoms, you count the volume. They're both different ways to count it. It's what fuels the sun. Most other stars, the planet Jupiter is mostly hydrogen, and there's a lot of hydrogen here on Earth as well. And then some oxygen, the third most abundant element in the known universe. And you can see the list there if you're curious of the ranking. Helium is there in the middle, between hydrogen and oxygen, but not the topic of our discussion today. So how important is water to life? Well, basically, everybody in this room, if we go out in the desert and sit down, we got 3 days before we're dead, okay? If you walk around, it's a lot less. And if you're in direct sunlight, it's a lot less. But that's just the rule of thumb. There's a whole rule of threes I may have touched on. I've touched on some of my exhortations. You know, in a survival incident, you've got 3 days, you've got 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and you can just do these threes to help you prioritize. In fact, I had to take U.S. Air Force survival training for ditching because I served on a research aircraft. Then we flew predominantly over water because we're Virginia, and they said, hey, there's a pack, it's got a little bit of water and a candy bar and some other stuff in it. Don't eat the candy bar, because if you eat the candy bar, you don't have enough water to process it, and it's going to kill you quickly. So don't eat the candy bar. That's not important. You just conserve your water. Oh, wait a minute. Did I have something else there? Oh, here, the angles. This is important. Water's a bent molecule. This is the whole reason that microwaves work, because it has positive and negative sides. When you hit it with a microwave that changes from positive to negative, you spin it, you make friction, you heat up your food. So this bent situation is very important, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. And there's a lot of different names. I like to, in restaurants, order dihydrogen monoxide or spent rocket fuel or something like that, but there are really a lot of names for it. Hydrogen oxide, hydrogen hydroxide, hydroxylic acid. Dihydrogen monoxide, this is one everybody uses for spoofs on panic chemical charts that they put up. I think I have one of these in the next slide. Hydric acid, hydroxyic acid. You want to sound smart, just order your water that way, etc. It can be dangerous. So in West Virginia, there's a river called the Gauley River. I don't know if anybody's been on it, around it, near it, heard of it. Well, it'll kill you. I tried, there's a rapid called Lost Paddle, because things that float go down there and don't come back up, because there's hydraulic traps with trees in them. If you go down there, you're going to get snagged in that. You're never coming out. Doesn't matter if you're wearing a life jacket or not. Well, old Jesse decided to paddle really hard when we hit one of these first rocks at the beginning of it, and shot himself right out of the boat. And yeah, so I spent, Lost Paddle is like 1/10 of a mile long. I spent the whole thing underwater, came up a couple times, pulled another guy out of the boat who got injured. I mean, it was a near-death experience. When they finally pulled me into the boat, I believe I passed out, because they told me I spent a lot of time in the boat, and I thought I hit the bottom of the boat and jumped up and got him back in my boat. A lady named Player from Virginia Beach pulled me out of the water with the help of another guy. But anyways, that's kind of my closest call right there. I've had other close calls, but that one was definitely, I was floating, looking at the green water, underwater, thinking, well, this might be it, because when I did come up, I couldn't breathe because I had inhaled some foam at the surface. But you see the spoof chemical chart, that would be the chemical warning symbol on something. If you walk up to a drum of that, you're going to wonder what is in there, what horrible thing is in there. It says it's color, you might not be able to read this. It's colorless and odorless. Accidental inhalation may be fatal. Prolonged exposure will cause severe tissue damage to the solid form, which was ice, right? And symptoms of ingestion include excessive sweating, urination, possibly a bloated feeling, nausea, vomiting, and body electrolyte imbalance. What a horrible thing that is, right? Horrible chemical. Well, it's the baseline of creation. It's so important, it's just part of the earth, no matter how you look at it. And we read this earlier, and it's just referred to as the face. Earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Earth was completely covered in water, and there could be no life on it. Too much of a good thing. Water is uniquely designed to do what God needs to do for our creation, the way that we are built. He could have gone other routes, but the route he went is water-centric. So the opposite charges of the polar molecules attract them together, and they loosely stick together. And they give the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules, give it a boiling point that's 200 degrees higher than it should be when compared to similar substances. Result is the water is a liquid that at room temperature, what we call room temperature, but other similar molecules like hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen selenide, and hydrogen telluride are all gases. So do you realize how important that is? If water was also, like its sister molecules, a vapor at room temperature right now, we would all explode. We would turn into steam. It would be very unpleasant. Water expands, also on the other side, freezing. Water expands by about 9% in volume and when it freezes. And this is so important because it means it floats. If water was heavier when it froze, like it should be, like everything else is, the top layer of the water would freeze and drop down, then the next layer would freeze and drop down, and soon the entire body of water is solid, full of dead fish, right? And that's the last time we have fish on Earth. So that's really important characteristics that really are odd that they are there. God made rules to interact and manage water for life. And again, Genesis 1, we already read this. He pulled the waters. He separated the water vapor from the liquid water. The water vapor is the firmament, the sky with water vapor in it, and the waters that are under it. We call seas and lakes oceans. Called the dry land earth. When he gathered it all together in pools, the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Oh, back to this picture. So you see that blue line, that would be the firmament, the light blue line in between the stars and the clouds. That's the firmament, and it's mostly transparent, thin. You ever seen a soap bubble float by? Well, that's about the thickness, proportionately, of the oxygen and water on Earth compared to the size of the bubble, which would be the Earth, the interior volume of it. So science's view of water, this is something I pulled off the net. This is not my words here. I'm not saying these things, but they're making a big deal about how important it is to find water. And humans aren't alone in the need for water. Liquid water is a necessity for every form of life known, with the possible exception of some plants or fungi that may get by on water vapor. So scientists are like, hey, if we can find water, we can find other life. And this is what scientists do. They're always looking for some other answer than God so that they can put their trust in that rather than just believing God, because that entails you've got to obey him. So NASA, the company that the NASA entity that I work for, is always looking for water. This Sophia, you can't really see in the back of that 747. There's a big hole. That's because the mountains weren't tall enough, so they put a telescope inside a 747. And they are able to fly and get really good data. They just are retiring this one now. So this research is over, and they're going to sell off the airplane, etc. So they have found a little water on the moon in Clavius crater, but it's been hard to say if it's water or hydroxyl, OH. So they said they found 100 to 412 parts per million, roughly equivalent to a 12-ounce bottle of water in the lunar soil. And for comparison, that's 100 times less than the soil in the Sahara Desert has it. So this is really not a lot to get excited over, right? That's in a pickup bed. If you have a 4x6 pickup bed, which is a short bed, that's how much you get. 12-ounce bottle of water from that much soil. And here's kind of, you might not be able to see this very well, maybe you can. They're looking in all of the spectra for the signature of water. The Hubble Space Telescope is looking at one, and the James Webb is looking at another frequency, and the Spitzer's looking at another. And all they're finding is vapor and solid. It's either frozen or gas. Too hot or too cold. There's no Goldilocks water set up there. All right. Meanwhile, here on Earth, every year there's an estimated almost 4,000 fatal unintentional drownings, including boating-related drownings. That's an average of 11 deaths per day. Alex and I went out on the boat this week, and the boat decided it didn't want to start for some reason. Vapor lock, probably, which is common on inboard boats, and I'm addressing it. However, we're sitting there, and you realize, hey, you're kind of stuck. You got to get a mile that way or 5 miles that way to reach land from where you are. We were in a safe location, anchored near a channel marker. Nothing was really bad. I had a tow company on the line, and then it just started and worked perfectly, which got us home 3 hours sooner. But it's a little worrisome, because you realize you're not in control. The water's in control. The water has you surrounded. People underestimate water. Don't be one of those, like I did in the Gauley River. Well, I didn't really, that was unintentional, but you can't float in white water because it's mostly air, just so you know that, even if you're wearing a life jacket. Water is also the most powerful and the original weapon of mass destruction. And we know the story of the flood. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. So a cubit's about the length of your arm, so you get the idea. All flesh died that moved upon the earth, fowl, cattle, beast, all whose nostrils were the breath of life. Of all that was in the dry land died. Every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground. Man, cattle, creeping things, fowls, they were all destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark, and I assume a lot of fish. But it's terrible stuff, and it was such a terrible destruction, God vowed never to do it again with the rainbow. But let's jump ahead to a bit as he works with his people with water. So if you start from the beginning, Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses in a basket floating in the Nile River. She called his name Moses, which means I drew him out of the water. So from the get-go, Moses was aware that he was saved from the water, which would have killed him if he wasn't rescued quickly, basket or no. Everything that floats in the water will eventually sink. How about the 10 plagues? Plague 1, waters were turned to blood, the fish in the river died, and the Egyptians couldn't drink the water. This is a problem. Very quickly. Plague 2, frogs swarmed forth out of the water. Doesn't say that, but we can assume that. Covering every inch of land and entering houses and bedrooms. And then plague 7, fiery hail struck down all the crops in the fields and shattered every tree. This is frozen water. Again, not a friendly thing when it's going, terminal velocity would be about 100 miles an hour and hits you, and if it's as big as a softball, that's going to be a problem, a spiky softball. And of course, the biggest use of water besides the flood that stands out, the Red Sea crossing. God withdrew the waters. He parted the waters to save Israel. Nothing in history compares to this. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of God went before them and for their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And then verse 21, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. That's a wind tide. I get them at my house. If I've got a northeast wind, it's going to be high tide at my house, and vice versa. It just blows the water up into the funnels of the adjacent rivers, but not to this degree. And the children of Israel went in the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Also, there was dry ground there. It would be soggy, take days to dry out. You couldn't walk on it, I guarantee it. Underneath water, it would have been, there is mud typically. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all the horses, chariots, and horsemen. And it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. He took off their chariot wheels, and they drave them heavily, so the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel. The Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. It's the equivalent of guys jumping out of their tanks and running for their lives, okay? And the Lord said, Stretch out thy hand upon the sea, and the waters may come again upon the Egyptians. And the Egyptians fled, so I've got a formatting issue there. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. So there's a imagery of a chariot wheel under the water there. And I recently heard of a fellow who claims that he's taken imagery of that area, and he can find 3 different kinds of chariot wheels. And the only, 3-spoke, 4-spoke, and another type. And the only time those 3 were in use at the same time would have been the time of the Exodus, coincidentally. And he finds coral covering skeletons of humans and horses as well. Now, I haven't validated that. That's going to be on my next research rabbit hole I'll go down, see if we can get some more with modern technology. In the law, water was very integral in the cleansing part. It's used in ceremonial washings in Exodus 30, 18 to 21. You shall also make a basin of bronze, which is a stand of bronze for washing. You'll put it between the tent and the meeting and the altar and put water in it, with which Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet when they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn food, offering the Lord, they shall wash with water so that they may not die. So water is essential to life here in that sense. Not because he doesn't say check to see if your feet are dirty, then wash. You're just going to wash with water. Leviticus has 15 places where bathe himself in water is used. 16:4, put on the holy linen coat, and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist, and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water, and then put them on. So if I was following those instructions, I get to the last step and go, dang, that was the first step. And he shall bathe his body in water in a holy place, and put on his garments, and come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, and make atonement for himself and for the people. How about this? So this is an artist rendition, me being the artist, of a rough calculation of how much water would have been stopped and piled up in the Jordan River when they crossed from the wilderness into the promised land, from death into life through water. So you can see my assumptions there. It would be a big ball of water, or maybe it was a cylinder, or maybe it was something else. It was not a lake. It was a heap. The Jordan flowed 10 millions of water per day back then, they think. Today's volume, I believe, is much less. And if it took 3 days for the people to cross, for 2 million people to cross, and I picked 3 days because, well, it fits with the life and death analogy very well, and it kind of fits the story as well. That's a 300-yard high and 600-yard wide hemisphere of water. Excuse me. Or about 1.3 billion cubic feet of water. And that's what that might look like based on me trying to do graphic stuff without graphic software. All right. Joshua 3, 15 through 17. And those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows its banks during the whole time of harvest, and the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So that imagery in the back, or that landscape, is that actual place. Of course, the ball of water is fake, but that's what that place might have looked like when this happened. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm in dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until the people had crossed completely over into Jordan, from death of the wilderness to life of the promised land. So there's certain things we know about water. If you're under it, you're dead. you're under it more than about 3 minutes. Some people can go a lot longer, but that's the average. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. So this is the ultimate certified death right here. The shark is just adding a little bit of extra danger to it, but different artists did that. So we as people make boats so that we can float on the water and do things and hopefully not die. They're temporary ways to manage water. They can fail at any time. I have had a boat that was sunk at the pier during a storm because I didn't listen to my grandfather, who was a captain of an amphibious assault ship for the U.S. Navy. He said, "Don't leave your boat there." I'm like, "Yeah, it'll be fine." Nope. It sunk after being pounded by waves for 24 hours. It flipped over. But I fixed it. And there's many stories in the Bible where people had to leave boats to be saved. This is kind of the important part. So we build these things to save ourselves. I got this big boat. I'm going to be okay. And we do this in life as well. Many people had to step out. We have to leave the things we build for safety, for our own strength, because they cannot save us, like idols, right? Many people had to take the step out of the safety zone, which we're comparing to a boat at this point, versus water, to move towards salvation. Jonah and Noah had to leave their boats. Well, one was kind of a fish boat, but for salvation. And God spake unto Noah, saying, "Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, all flesh, fowl, cattle, creeping thing that creeps upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth and be fruitful and multiply." If they stayed in the ark, that wouldn't have gone well. Jonah 1:15. So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. And the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord, and made vows. Now Jonah, the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah up, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Probably should have added the one where he gets put up on the beach and continues on in his work. We talked about Moses being rescued from a boat. How about Peter? He left boats twice to get closer to Jesus. One time walking on the water, and Jesus had to save him when he wasn't able to maintain that miracle. And then after Jesus was resurrected, he jumped out of a boat to get closer to Jesus. Perfectly good boat. Paul should have been dead from water, among other things. "Thrice I suffered shipwreck, and I have night and a day I have been in the deep." That's a lot of peril from water right there, and he survived it. Jesus uses a lot of water metaphors. This is not accidental. John 4:5, we know the story about the Samaritan woman at the well. Verse 10, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So again, here Jesus is drawing a distinction between regular water that you drink and living water, the power of God to sustain your life forever, not temporarily, not for 3 days only. 13, Jesus answered, verse 11, let's read it. "You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, and did also his sons and his livestock?" And Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. This is the truth. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't be thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." This was probably the major task of her life, was hauling water for her household. Who knows how far she had to walk. But one thing's for sure, it was uphill and downhill, because wells are typically at the lower parts of the geography in the area. And so walking up and down, carrying water weighs 8 pounds a gallon. It's a lot of work, and their clay jars were not light even when they were empty. She could have had animal skins, those would be lighter. Jesus declared he's a source of life greater than that you can get from physical water. John 7:37, "On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Jesus was a master of water and death. We know that he physically calmed seas. He chemically changed water into wine. He functionally made water support his weight and hold together. And of course, he is the source of spiritual water for everlasting life. 1 Peter 3:18 through 22. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience towards God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. And it helps when you talk too much. It's hard to get away from how important it is. So here, I'd like you all to meet Hazel and her son Daniel, born Friday, 7/19 in Perth, Australia. Spiritually born. Romans 6. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know ye not that so many of us were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. We have been planted together in the likeness of his death. We shall also in the likeness of his resurrection. We shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is freed from sin. Now if we be dead with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. Knowing that Christ, being raised from the dead, dies no more, death has no more dominion over him. For in that he died unto sin once, but in that he lives unto God. Likewise, reckon ye also yourselves to be dead indeed, unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So we make the choice whether or not water is liquid death or if it's life. This is a cute marketing ploy that's making them billions of dollars, literally. But it's how you approach it, right? Jesus said unto him, John 14:6, Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. Thanks for your attention.